Hello and welcome to Political Paradigm. I am Terry Ikumi. There's so much to talk about today, so let's get right into it. Africa, Nigeria, and indeed democracy as well as governance is our focus today. And I'm joined by the Roman Catholic Bishop of Sokoto Diocese, Bishop Matthew Kukah. Welcome to Political Paradigm,
Thanks,
Bishop.
Terry. Thank you.
It's good to see you. You look fresh. Welcome back from Rome.
Thanks for having me. Thank you very much.
How was it in Rome?
Great. Great. Any time is a good enough time to be in Rome. And when the opportunity presents itself, I mean, like it did 2 days ago, it's a massive spectacle to behold. It's a place that anybody and everybody would like to be there. So yes, it was, especially, this was very special for us in Nigeria.
It's good to hear that.
Yeah.
So, the emergence of Pope Leo XIV, we saw a lot of leaders flock into Rome, and we saw African leaders as well. Now, the thing is that a lot of people may be in the dark as to what exactly is the big idea of having African leaders or the world leaders converge on Rome for the inauguration of the Pope. So perhaps you could explain the significance of a Pope, this Pope, based on his history, and explain to those who don't know in basic terms what this means for Africa and perhaps the world in general.
I think the worry should be who was not in Rome, and as you saw, luckily I was in Rome for the burial of Pope Francis, and again something very dramatic happened because every square inch of that territory, it's a space for negotiation at the highest level. You saw, for example, after the mass, during the burial, you saw Zelensky and Trump just securing the little space to have a conversation that was really very profound. So when anything happens in the Vatican, everybody who is anybody wants to show up. There was always drama because usually Vatican protocol is slightly different from the things you're familiar with. And I remember the burial of Pope John Paul II, when we had this drama of Mugabe, for example, being beside the United Kingdom, Iran being beside Israel, and so on and so forth. So, because they arrange in alphabet. So sometimes the most unlikely people show up, including people who are not talking to one another. And that's why it's a massive moral space, and that's why you saw the kind of people that showed up. But even most importantly, it is that the Pope, any Pope for that matter, that has been the story through history, has always been the moral compass, for where the world is going. And I think that in the last perhaps 20, 30 years since people like us, you came of age, beginning from the election of Pope John Paul II, that is really the most spectacular event. One, it coincided, of course, with globalization and the media and so on and so forth. And then, of course, you saw the kind of huge impact that he made. So I think usually every world leader defines their moral relevance or even their relevance by how far or how near they are to the Pope. So so it was not really for everybody to have had a chance to be invited. It was something to celebrate. And for us in Nigeria, it's the first time that a Nigerian president, it's not the first time, but at least at the inauguration of a Pope, it's the first time that a Nigerian president will be there. I was there at the burial of Pope John Paul II. President Obasanjo was also there. But this was a very special moment for us, in part because, as you saw some of the video clips, our president had a good opportunity to shake hands with the Pope and have even a bit of conversation, because the Pope, as you know, was born in Chicago, and the president also had spent some time in Chicago. So it's a good starting point.
Is it also palatable, so to speak, to hold on to the argument of those who say that Africa needs, this should have been an African Pope? I know you followed that conversation as well, especially because you talk about the significance of the Pope and how world leaders converge. So imagine an African holding that position. Of what impact would it be to Africa in general?
Well, let's win the World Cup first. I think we still have a long way to go. I did write an article in the course of all of this. And I remember remarking something that happened when Pope John Paul II died. And, you know, people thought, the speculators thought, you know, that Cardinal Renzi came very close. But as you know, really, this is really, it's not, you know, electing a pope is not like that. It's not an Emilio Con scenario in which you say, these people have had their turn, now it's our turn. No, it's not, it doesn't work like that. And then the pundits who think that this is like betting on a horse or whatever, you always notice that by and large, you know, when people begin to make their speculations, they are using human parameters of their own calculation. And very often, most of those who make these you know, calculations simply accumulate their own data and suggest this is where it's going to go. But always, 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 people are always shocked. In part because the election of a pope is not like any other election anywhere in the world. You know, what is very interesting about the election is that it is an election in which, you know, you're going out to vote. You are both a candidate and a voter. Okay, you're both a candidate and a voter. So you are voting, you can either, I don't think people vote for themselves necessarily, but it means whatever vote you cast, you know, somebody else is voting for you, but you also have a right to be chosen. And what was even more spectacular about the election of Pope Leo is that these are 133 men. They know one another, but not in a very close way. I mean, I was at the synod and I met the current Pope Leo. I mean, during, he opened the door for me, but sometimes I look back and I say, oh my goodness, if I had known he was going to be Pope, maybe we would have done a little bit more. But nobody saw it coming. And suddenly we go in there, every Catholic believes, and every Christian, everybody believes that it is the Holy Spirit that does this. Because 133 people go in with name tags because they don't know, everybody doesn't know everybody. There are a few people who have been friends. Cardinals were made, you know, just at the last consistory. So there are people who are just walking into this for the very first time. They've never had this experience before. They don't know one another. They've not. So it's not as if you've had any opportunity to lobby or to put a manifesto, anything of the sort. And then, you know, then as now, we have always believed and believe solidly, unequivocally, that the Holy Spirit has his own way of aggregating what he wants. So we are going to do what human beings do, but God already has an idea about what exactly it is that he wants, you know, of his church. And from the time of Peter till date, the Holy Spirit has not failed the church. Let me put it that way.
Bishop, when we look at the Pope, we see a man who has so much respect from world leaders. And Africa has a situation where it requires a lot of assistance from Western countries or more developed countries. What do you expect of this Pope with regard to how influential he could be on world leaders to offer the necessary assistance to Africa, or in fact to Africa's development in general?
Look, I'm a very proud Nigerian. Okay, Nigeria is not Sudan. Nigeria is not, we're not Gaza. Nigeria is not Syria. Nigeria is not Libya. Nigeria is not just any country. We are a heck of a country with massive resources that can take care of us and take care of our neighbors. So for me, it's not a job of a pope to decide how the corrupt Nigerian state addresses the problems of how it manages its resources. It's not the business of the Pope. Of course, maybe I shouldn't say it was not the business, but I was in Congo when the Pope visited in 2023. I represented the bishops of West Africa, and of course, you remember what the Holy Father said, you know, about telling the international community to take his hands off Africa. Now, those are the only kind of things that the Pope can say. But in the final analysis, it is not the fault of the Pope, and it's not the Pope's business to decide why Nigeria and other leaders in Africa, why the Nigerian politician has turned politics into a criminal enterprise. It's not the business of the Pope. All the Pope can do is to offer a moral guide. And of course, even when people talk about an African Pope or a Nigerian Pope, you might only just be so nominally. But like I said, and I've often said, there's nothing like an African Pope. Okay, because if it is an African Pope, Africans have to elect him, and he has to only govern the church in Africa. But you can elect an African, so you can have a Pope who is an African, but you can't have an African Pope. But the point to make is, as you saw with Pope Francis, he never went back to Argentina. And there are video clips, for example, of this current Pope. I just watched the clip with him shaking his big brother, his elder brother. Now, you could see from the brother's face, so is that all we can get? Because after he finishes embracing him, that is about the best he could get. He has to move on. So it's no longer a family matter. So I don't think that Africa should expect that it will have the kind of advantages, because we Africans like to make these projections. The president is from my town, therefore it's our turn. The governor is from my community, therefore my community will change. The Pope has a duty and a responsibility, but it depends on how Africans prepare themselves, and how the leadership in Africa arranges, because I can speak rather authoritatively. One thing, and I think it's very important to make this point, that for Nigeria, a country of this nature, we've had 3 papal visits, okay? And Pope John Paul II came, 2, in 1982. He came back again in 1990, is it 93? I'm trying to remember the exact, 1998. And what was very interesting is that in all those visits, Muslims were in charge of Nigeria. Shagari in 1982, Abacha, in 1995 to 98, before his death. And then now, Asiwaju Ahmed Bola Tinubu. I think that speaks a lot to the nature or the sense of urgency that Nigerian leaders and Nigerian Christians and Muslims, the investment that we must make in avoiding the collision that is created in the name of religion.
So this brings me to the question of the nexus between religion and politics, because clearly religion is impacting on our politics and affecting development. What is the nexus?
We are a post-colonial state, okay? Before the British came, there was no Nigeria. There were kingdoms and there were ethnic groups and so on and so forth. And I think this is important to understanding whether it's Boko Haram or whether it's wherever we find ourselves today. The British, before the British, you had the empires, whether it's the kingdom, whether it's the empire, the Benin Empire, or whether it's Oyo, but perhaps the most dominant was the Sokoto Caliphate, with a total landmass of about 250,000 square kilometers, which is huge because that's about half the size of Nigeria. But then in 1903, the British conquered, defeated the Caliphate. And that set the tone. And I think that anybody who is a student of religion and politics in Nigeria must come to terms with the fact that to understand the ongoing tension, to understand why Boko Haram is making the claims it is making, to understand why Muslim politicians continue to talk about living under Sharia law, to understand the mind of the average Muslim, especially in northern Nigeria, you must return to that point, where people felt a sense of defeat. And along with that defeat came the decapitation of the institutions of power. So, for example, if you read Lugard's speech, Lord Lugard said, now that I've defeated you, the Sultan had the power to appoint, emirs. The Sultan then had, and his emirs had power over taxation. The first thing Lugard did was to say, I take the power to appoint emirs away from you. I take the powers to appoint, to generate taxes away from you. And that subordinated the rump of the caliphate to colonial rule. And the result is that we are still dealing with some of those issues. That's why today it is not the appointment of a sultan, the appointment of an emir is the business of the state governor. And the governor will choose whomever he wants to choose. Not necessarily based on the kind of moral credential, because no emir needs to show evidence that they've been to, they have a degree in Islamic studies, for example. As you know, there are many people who have come from different backgrounds, the military background, the banking background, background in bureaucracy. So that reduced severely the moral role that the Islamic emirs had to play, because at that time they were both religious leaders and political leaders. But now that has been substantially downgraded, and that is why we see the things that we see. Along with that then comes Christianity, coming from a Western liberal, and of course the mistake that many Muslims make and many people make is that Christianity came with colonialism. Absolutely, the history doesn't lead to that conclusion. But you can see that whereas Islam tends to focus on building a theocracy, Christianity focuses on a liberal environment in which all of us can thrive. When they were debating what now became the United Nations Human Rights Declaration, the government of Saudi Arabia said no, because we don't accept the idea that people can be individuals. We also don't accept the idea of human rights. So there are a lot of these healthy tensions. They've been with us, but one of the most tragic things that hasn't happened in Nigeria is that the Nigerian state, those who govern Nigeria, have not had the political will, to set the tone, to put religion where it ought to be, and to put the state where it ought to be. Because now we have Section 10 of the Constitution that simply says that no state shall adopt any religion as a state religion. But you know that is not the truth in practice. So it's a very delicate balance. But the point I'm making is that many Muslims in northern Nigeria are still nostalgic about a caliphate that has moved on. But as you can see from ISIS and Boko Haram, there are still people, largely political science called them Islamicists. That is, those who believe that Islam can now become the tools for building now that democracy has failed. But truth be told, the modern state must focus on the fact that Islam can be a source of law, Christian values can be a source of law, African traditional laws can be a source of law, but all of us must become citizens under one law.
I'm going to hold on to you saying that democracy has failed because it's part of what we want to talk about. But you talked about the role that religious and traditional leaders had to play, which involved political leadership at the time. That role was taken from them. Now, there's this clamor so far for traditional institutions to be inculcated into the Constitution. I don't know what political role that would allude them or attribute to them, but let's look at having traditional rulers, religious leaders, play political leadership roles.
I'm reading a book now which I wish everybody should read. It's a book written by the current INEC chairman, Professor Mahmoud. Excellent book. It's about traditional rulers and politicians. And it's an excellent book to read because it speaks nothing, the distortions are still basically the same. Because what were the issues? The colonial state simply co-opted the traditional institutions as junior partners. The welfare and well-being of the average citizen became, a suspended animation. So traditional rulers oversaw the collection of taxes. In exchange, they got a little bit of the action. The modern Nigerian state has not improved on that relationship. And I don't want to go into the debate because I don't know how it's going to function, whether a place for traditional rulers in the Constitution suggests we're going to have remove the signboard that talks of a 3-arm zones and have a 4-arm zone, whether we're going to have a replication of all this at the level of the states, and whether all that is going to displace, all the Constitution, the amendments that have been made and that have placed traditional institutions where they ought to be. I don't know the politics, but for me, many people mistakenly think about traditional rulers and collapse them into religious leaders. Traditional rulers are not religious leaders necessarily, because like I said to you, after 1903, that role ended. And that is why, for example, I am a bishop, I'm a priest. I have to produce my certificates to show that I went to a school of theology before I got to where I am. The traditional ruler doesn't need, all he needs is the goodwill of the governor. And he doesn't have to literally, he's not the same person who leads prayers. I cannot be a bishop and not be in my cathedral leading prayers. So the roles are different, but I think we've watched the contaminating and the toxic effect of politics in religion and the traditional institutions. And I don't know those who want to take that risk and what the attractions really are. But it's difficult to see how we can ride this tiger without ending in its stomach. I was at a conference of West African bishops in Dakar only about a fortnight ago. And one of the bishops from Kenya was talking about the fact that in Kenya, in Ghana, he said they now have 350 cases in different courts in Ghana relating to traditional institutions. So I don't know how, but I believe that maybe in their wisdom, The traditional rulers will make their case, other Nigerians will make their case, but I just know that we have seen records of people being removed because of political affiliation or lack of it. And as I said, frankly, it is difficult for me because I don't know what the attractions are beyond just maybe, is it that we want to sit at the table? Whatever it is, I think that...
I think it's a defined role.
Well, I don't know what you mean by defined role. Look, okay, let me use myself as an example. When you talk of a defined role, okay, so like what? You draw boundaries? Because currently there are defined rules. And from 1975, the late emir of, the late sultan of Sokoto, Dasuki, he chaired the committee that made some really revolutionary changes, moving from the native authority system, to where we have today, that has been subjected to all kinds of amendments. But like I said, I have not seen a text of what exactly, because we're making this rather superfluous thing about a role in the constitution. And by the way, let's also be clear. This is not a country that takes its constitution seriously to start with. Otherwise, all the things we hear about in chapter 2 of the Nigerian constitution, none of them is operational. So it's not that it is in the constitution. I don't know what that means. But like I said, right now, I don't know how many thousand traditional rulers there are in Nigeria. I don't know whether they will have a house for traditional rulers, how they will enter, what parties they will contest under, or how they will. I don't know. But if you ask me, it is just to say it is Nigeria's way of dealing with problems. You are scratching people where they are not itching. Right now, people are hungry, people are frustrated. There's a lot of, the country is literally falling apart. Let me put it, as far as this insecurity is concerned. Shouldn't we focus on getting these things and gaining altitude, rather than, because there are just too many things and the volatility does not allow for this kind of, because as I said, I know that the problem with traditional institutions in a democracy, and if you look at China, look at Asia, we are not the first people to have traditional institutions. Democracy in Europe was built on the ruins of feudalism. All right? The same thing in India. When Nehru became, prime minister, at about the same time that Nigeria became, an independent state. You know what they did. We know what happened in China. So for me, when we see the crisis that we are still going through in Nigeria, because most of all of this, legitimate as they are, the real challenge is the nature of the Nigerian plan. The state is volatile. Okay, we are busting in the seams. There are so many ingredients of conflict already in place. There are communities that are still fighting. There are communities that can't go back home over the fight of boundaries of land and traditional stools and so on and so forth. How much we're going to put into this Molotov cocktail, I don't know. But I'm just saying, I don't know whether this should be a national conversation. Because in my view, there are so many problems, and we need to inject a greater sense of urgency in keeping our country safe, first of all. Traditional rulers have been killed in the course of, for crying out loud. Priests have been killed. People have, every day, you ask yourself, what kind of a country, how do we live with this? Today, 50 people have been killed, 40 people have been killed. You're hearing all these stories, and guess what? We're just switching on to the next channel. So for me, the issues are huge. And if you ask me, it is important for us to rank our priorities. But let national stability, a stable country, be over and above any other interest.
Bishop, you're widely traveled, especially in Africa, because of your role in Christendom. You've seen Africa evolve over time. And some of the things you talk about, many would say, are drawn from history, where Africa used to be, in quote, a great continent, but over time, leadership has failed. So if you could take us through the history of Africa and what led to this collapse of leadership, because we see this collapse has led to a resurgence of military rule in Western Africa.
That's subject for a PhD thesis or even 5 PhD theses. But look, the point is that it's not enough for us to say we didn't recover from the distortions of the colonial state. Because if you take a country like Nigeria, for example, in fairness to the British, they left us a bureaucracy. And for me, more than any other thing, institution in governance, the bureaucracy remains the most important. Because, like I've said severally, it is the conveyor belt, for all the good intentions that a government may have. Like I often say to people, if you say to your wife, look, I'm expecting 10 people tomorrow. Please, can you take, 50,000 naira? I need you to have a very good dish because I'm expecting some guests. It's not your fault if your wife takes your money and then decides that, she saw a good pair of earrings and she wants to buy them, and she takes out 10,000 naira to buy a new pair of earrings. She gets somebody had, a friend of hers says, look, we just got a shoebi, would you like to? And she tells, by the time she starts cooking tomorrow, most of your money is gone. Now, whose fault is it? So the point I'm making is that government policies, and I've looked at government close enough to realize that many of these people, president, governors, decent people struggling to do good, but everybody abuses only the president and the governor. But let me tell you, this country has become so dysfunctional largely because of the poor quality of the public service. And this goes back, if you look at, when you think about the Philip Aseodus of this world, when you think about the Ahmed Jodas of this world, when you think about the first generation of technocrats that this country had before the military tragically struck, and then created this distortion that has now brought us to where we are. I always go back to, because most people think that Lee Kuan Yew's Singapore is the best example for us to take. But guess what? Lee Kuan Yew won elections in 1969. And Lee Kuan Yew conducted elections, never lost any election. The worst elections results would have been 80% for almost 40 years until he finished. The current Prime Minister of Singapore is my classmate at the Kennedy School. But they will tell you that the most important thing for them is public service. And Lee Kuan Yew laid that foundation to make sure that the brightest and the best went to the public service. So they have laid that foundation. And guess what? It's only last year, if you remember, that the first high-ranking Singaporean public officer was found guilty and tried. And how much was the money? $200,000 or so. And it was not money that he collected from somebody. It was money that they said, it was tickets and all kinds of favors that were done to him because he was chairman of some sports something. Now, compared with what we have in Nigeria today, civil servants are contractors, civil servants have construction companies, civil servants are into oil, because the civil servants realize that they were the conveying vehicle for the criminality by the politicians. And they say, wait, why should we be doing all these things for other people? So we have a public service that is not working. It's become inimical even to the interests of government and to the interests of the people. How to fix it, I don't know. And here, please, if you indulge me, I give credit to whom credit is due. There's a gentleman, you know him, Ike Imokede. Now, Ike Imokede, he's invited me to one or two of his events. An excellent, for he and his wife to set up an outfit that is focusing on how to improve the public service. Initially, when I was cynical about it, but I attended one of his sessions. And he's been putting money into trying to reform the civil service in his own little way. And you can see from that conversation, that there is measurable improvement in the public service. It will take us a long time, but how to scrape the bottom of the pot and make the public service an honorable place is fundamental to how you're going to fix. It's not just Nigeria, how you're going to fix public service in Africa, because we have the resources, we have the money, but people are not feeling the impact. So African politics, we can no longer blame the colonialists because they're not responsible for where we now find ourselves. We are responsible for where we find ourselves. And you look at it and you see, for example, cars belonging to state governments, cars belonging to public servants, cars belonging to government offices are Tokumbo. And you see a federal government of Nigeria sign on a Tokumbo car. Who does that? You check this country and ask yourself whether there has ever been any incident in which you ask to buy X that is required to fix Nigeria, and you're buying it in London, you're buying it in New York, you're buying it in Paris, whether there has been any incident in which the Nigerian contractor didn't go and buy a second hand. So it's not about why the state is failing. We know people always talk about the corruption of government or that leaders are failing. For me, we confuse office holders with leaders. I've said it severally. People are holding office. They are not leaders. Because you can only be a leader if there is something that you have a philosophy that people can buy. Okay, so Mahatma Gandhi, for example, and I always make the point, we must understand that leadership and office are two different things. Mahatma Gandhi was no Prime Minister of India. He didn't even seek the office. But he had such a high threshold of moral authority. He came up with this philosophy of Satyagraha, it's about non-violence. And he took it as a philosophy and managed to inspire millions of people around the world. That's where Martin Luther King went and spent time before he came back, even as a priest, to understand the value of, what do you call it, of non-violence. So the choices that we make in Africa are not in keeping with the kind of resources that we have. And this is where, to go back to Pope Leo and what the Pope was saying, it is that Pope Francis laid the foundation for making the point, and he did so in his own personal life by certain choices that he made, whether it's accommodation, whether it's the kind of cars he wore and he entered, and so on and so forth. He made those examples to show that this aggressive acquisition that has become the philosophical basis for governance in Africa is not sustainable. Even the criminals in other parts of the world are smart with what they do with their criminality. It's only the Nigerian criminal that the African criminal, let me put it that way. 90% of the money stolen in this country is taken out of the country. Thabo Mbeki, the African Union asked Thabo Mbeki to look at the whole question of illegal, flow of resources out of Africa. And you saw the hundreds and billions of dollars that are flowing out of the continent. The white man will tell you, I'm not holding a gun to your head and asking you to bring your resources to us. Banditry, you can correlate banditry, especially in most parts of northern Nigeria today, with mining. And people have talked and talked, but this is Nigeria. You make the point and nothing happens.
Perhaps it's on this basis that a lot of people are clamoring for either a restructuring or change in the system of governance. Those who argue that democracy has failed or is failed.
No, democracy has not failed.
Yeah, you had also said that it's not failed.
No, it hasn't failed. Look, let me tell you, again, it's an old expression. Churchill said democracy is the worst form of government, except for others. The fact that men are fighting with their wives doesn't mean marriage is not a good institution. And in any case, there will always be this tension, healthy tension. I saw a newspaper heading, I didn't read the story, of a man somewhere in Lagos who was saying that he cannot stay if he's together with his wife, he cannot stay for 3 days without a fight. Now, but he didn't say anything about our marriage is off. So it is that, we are dealing with competing narratives, competing expectations. So every state is bound to be volatile. The challenge is whether a state can design the kind of guardrails that can stop us from falling over. So democracy has an aggregate of issues. Okay, it wasn't meant to deliver the good life. It was just meant to create opportunity. Because in 1776, the Americans said in their Declaration of Independence, we are creating a space where, people can pursue happiness. What defines happiness to you is not necessarily the same to me, but it is you need that quantum of freedom.
Well, Bishop, the democracy may not have failed, but if there are indicators suggesting failure of democracy, especially across the world, you've also said that there's no perfect democracy anywhere in the world. And there are those who argue that if you look at other democracies in the world, you see the level of progress they are making. Would you say that Nigeria's democracy is progressing because the indicators suggest otherwise?
No, it depends on who is doing the weighting. I spent a lot of time as a student at the Kennedy School designing, involved in a class in which we were struggling to design tools. How do you measure governance? Because you can measure governance. Okay, you can measure governance. The World Bank is using those tools. The Mo Ibrahim Institute are using those tools. That is that there are an aggregate. Do people feel secure? What is the level of human freedom and sense of free expression? So there are things you can aggregate. And guess what? It was never really the case that democracy will be a tool for, necessarily deliver development. Because like I've said somewhere, the only thing is that most people will agree that in many parts of Africa, developing countries, they develop under a dictatorship. Lee Kuan Yew, as I said, was in power for almost 40 years. Even when he finished, he still remained for another 5 years. The tragedy with us in Nigeria is that we had military rule in which the military took away our freedom of expression. But in exchange, they didn't give us development because they were busy killing themselves. Everybody saw the wealth of Nigeria, and it was one coup after the other. And then, of course, you had in the military situation, the problem with the military rule is that it is not he who has the brains that wins. It is the person who is able to fire the first shot. So the beauty of democracy is the freedom to choose. And guess what? That freedom is important because it tells you that when you choose wrongly, live with the wrong choice that you've made.
So that's one indicator, Bishop.
But that's one indicator.
In Nigeria,
yes,
one of the indicators, as we've both established, is that willingness to participate in democratic processes shows that the people believe in the democracy and they are willing to, get involved in it. But in Nigeria, voter apathy suggests otherwise. As a matter of fact, the House of Representatives is now proposing compulsory voting, believing that
that's absolute nonsense. I mean, why don't you compel the state to feed Nigerians first? Look, people make their choices. And to talk about compelling Nigeria, you are sitting in the House of Assembly, somebody has said publicly, every member of the House of Assembly is going home with $1 billion for constituency projects we will not see. 1 billion naira. At least that is the minimum everybody is taking home. Are you going to sit in that comfort and preach to me? Preach about what? That I should go and vote for what? The challenge is whether politicians can make politics such a noble thing that people really want to go there. Now, people will go to vote because, look, economists, I'm not an economist, but economists talk about what they call incentive compatibility. You are making me an offer. It must be compatible with what, and if it is compatible with what I want, I will open an account with your bank. So don't tell me the politicians in Nigeria today who have found their way to power and who have shown no reflexes to be sufficiently concerned about what is happening to our people should not be the ones to preach to us, because you're just telling me now I should continue to push this wheelbarrow while you're sitting inside. It's not like that. But guess what? Democracy is a work in progress. It will always remain a work in progress. In fact, the emergence of what the world calls illiberal democracies in Europe suggests, that as we see it, democracy is not delivering. But guess what? Nobody is suggesting in America, Trump came, people are not happy with, those who are not happy with Trump. But nobody is about to say, as a result of that, the military should take over America. The challenge for us in Africa is this false assumption that these people are not working. Therefore, our man who lost the election should have done better. We don't know. You married Agnes instead of Anne. There's no need wasting your time saying, had I married Anne, I would have been better. It's not, it doesn't, there's absolutely no proof. And I say to my parishioners, the solution to a bad marriage is not a new marriage. Fix the problem. So we are, as a country, are very impatient. And I can understand why we're impatient. But it would be an illusion to suggest or to think that we're going to solve this problem by just another round of election will give us new opportunities. But initially, because look at it this way, and to tell you how Nigerians have emotionally invested in development, it is a pity and it is a tragedy that the political elite are not compensating Nigerians. But the very fact that nobody has called for a military coup, for example, the very fact that those thoughts are not in anybody's mind, and the very fact that with all its this convoluted environment, Nigerians are still committed to, whether they understand or whether they expect that it will do good for them, they don't know. But we can only continue to encourage our people because there is no alternative to democracy. And like I said, it's not a perfect system of government, but if we agree that it only lasts for 4 years, the challenge is if you lose an election, don't spend your time mourning. Spend your time strategizing and selling yourself so that the opportunity will come. The only thing to say is that since independence till date, there is no president that has not been subject to vilification, no president that has not been subject to abuse. I remember when the Pope came here in February in 1982 under President Shagari. Shortly after the president left, President Shagari started what he called a campaign for what he called an ethical revolution. And of course, Professor Wole Soyinka, our most revered playwright, saw in it a drama. They say if you look at a pigeonhole, everything becomes a pigeon. And for Wole Soyinka, it was theater. So he now composed, this caricature of a music that he called Ethical Revolution. We joked about it, but I'm sure when he looks back now, he would know that how we followed the path that Shagari tried to set for us. That is to create a sense of ethical behavior about what is right and what is wrong. Right now, we're at a point where we don't know what is right or what is wrong, because if a Nigerian wants to cheat you or wants to say a bad thing or wants to do wrong, they will tell you this is Nigeria, which means everything is discounted.
That's a followership problem. I know we talk about leadership where, yes, everything rises and falls with leadership. But when you have a set of followers who do not, follow correctly, if I don't,
no. See, the Nigerians are, the problem, part of our problem is that the followers, so-called, we are better educated, we are probably richer, that doesn't include it, but it's not, politicians are actually messengers in other places. When Trump comes back from Saudi Arabia, from his journey, and says he managed to pull out a $600 billion contract, those who funded sent him on an errand. Okay? Those are the powerful people. That's what he went for. He went on an errand. So politicians actually are supposed to go on an errand for the people. But that's where big interest decides that we want this person because he will meet this.
Bishop,
but in our own case, when you talk about followership, you are assuming Nigerians we have some of the most educated, some of the most brilliant people that the world knows. So we are not looking for a leader to follow. I'm sorry, Nigerians are not looking for a leader to follow. Okay, they are looking for ideas that they can congregate around, not individuals to follow. If Awolowo appears today, if Sadona appears today, if Zik appeers today, they will not have the kind of, because at the time we all followed them, we were so ill-equipped intellectually and otherwise that but that rhythm has changed. People are looking for, the business of government is not to deliver X, Y, Z. It is largely to create a condition. Okay, so when you hear many young people talking about jobs and jobs and jobs, it is more, can you imagine what would happen in Nigeria if, for example, the average young person is guaranteed that there is electricity in this country 24 or even 20 hours every day? What will they be looking for jobs for? Really? How many people want to go to the public service? But as you can see, Trump comes back with 600, with having extracted that contract, and then he says to Americans, I'm going to guarantee you 460 jobs. He's just created a condition, whether it's Boeing or any or Meta or any of these organizations, I've created a condition for you to create employment. But in Nigeria here, we're all abusing president, abusing governor. He has failed to create jobs. It's the business of government is to create a conducive environment in which people that are so gifted can exploit the opportunities available to them. And I think that is, by and large, what many young people are frustrated by. The feeling of constriction, that the opportunities for them to express themselves have been denied them.
Well, I recall the young lady who's just become a mayor in England, and the comments under some of the posts I saw there pointed to the fact that it would be easier for her, as an individual Nigerian, to be something like that outside this country at a young age than in Nigeria. But beyond that, it's May 29th in a few days. Ordinarily, it would have been Democracy Day, but it's now June 12th. But it's half-life for the Tinubu administration. So as we look towards Democracy Day, because when that day comes, I guarantee that there are Nigerians who are going to say, what's there to celebrate? So assess this administration in the last 2 years. It's been a roller coaster of emotions for a lot of people, considering the hardship that we fell into since the Tinubu administration.
Well, my Easter message was, Mr. President, please bring us down from the cross. Nobody is under any illusion about the amount of suffering in the country. And nobody can pretend that we don't know what violence and its persistence has cost this country. Whether there are shortcuts or no shortcuts, one of the things I've said about this government is that I wish that they had, and I think there's quite a long list of names of people, Boala, Sunday Dare, Onanuga, I don't know who is doing what, but I wish that there will be a much more friendly process of engaging Nigerians, paying attention to their pains and their suffering, and not taking that for granted. And also not thinking that because you are criticizing government, it means you don't like Nigeria, or that you are criticizing the government because you don't like the president. No, it is that I'm sure, like somebody, I think it was my friend Senator Adams Oshimole, who was saying yesterday that all this thing about removal of subsidy, it was just a question of style and strategy. But he said, had Atiku won the election, he said he would remove subsidy. Had Peter Obi won the election, he said he would have removed subsidy. Ashiwaju said if he won the election, he would remove subsidy. We have a problem with sequencing and timing. But since I'm not the president, I'm not responsible for his taking a decision, I don't know, but it's a question of choosing. Do you prefer to cry on Monday or to cry on Sunday? Which one? Cry, you go cry, but which day are you going to cry? And this is why I think that the mistake that the government may have made would have been its inability to develop a much more friendly, much more engaging system. Because I've used this example. This little, when you see a mother, there's this small thing, it's plastic, I think they call it pacifier. That mother has put in the mouth of a small baby. The baby will be sucking it, there's nothing inside. But the baby is sucking it, so the mother has time to continue cooking in the kitchen. There's nobody crying and disturbing her. In an environment of such tremendous pain, sometimes it's important to create enough pacifiers. How, I don't know, but these are things that could easily be done. Because give credit to Nigerians. I keep saying, it's a heck of a country. Nigerians are angry, and people, the critics say that, whatever you do to Nigerians, they will take it. But even the capacity and the ability to accept all these things and not have the illusion that change will come immediately. All we need to do is to look at South Sudan today and to look at what has happened to Sudan. I used to be at international conferences. I was a consultant at the Vatican on interreligious dialogue. And I know how much this whole question of taking South Sudan out of Sudan, where the Christians say, we want to be on our own because these Muslims are killing them. We want to be on our own. You couldn't open your mouth to tell any Sudanese what is now South Sudan. You couldn't tell any of them that it go hard. They said, no, we just want to go. They left. Where are we today? The Muslims, there must have been some Muslims in Sudan who said, yeah, let these useless Christians, let them just go. They should go. Now, where is South Sudan and where is Sudan today? So, the point I'm making is I'm happy that Nigerians realize that it's not easy. And I can only continue to encourage Nigerians because I know that the opposite could be worse. And when you hear the stories of Gaza, when you hear what is happening in DRC Congo, you hear what is happening elsewhere, you just know that poor people can rush, they will kill themselves, they will die, the big boys will still take care of themselves. So I am hopeful that the government can consistently and persistently continue to collaborate with the subnational groups to find the best ways of ameliorating the sufferings and the pains of Nigeria. And I've said this severally, we're not going to solve this question by just distributing bags of rice. It's not going to work. People are really suffering, and we need to inspire a bit of confidence now in them. I believe that what I would have liked to hear is, okay, this is how much we have saved from this subsidy. And this is where what we have saved is, this is where it's going to go to. I don't know how to read budget. I haven't seen the details in the budget. But it would have been important for us to see a rollout of things to cushion the pains and the sufferings that Nigerians
Perhaps we should point to the subnationals, because I know the federal government says now that the states get more money from subsidy removal. States have also alluded to that.
This Nigeria, there are certain decisions we took that account for where we are. You see, I've often said, and I don't have the political science, whatever, to back it up, but I've asked people and nobody has told me. I said, look, does anybody remember any former British colony that has created states? India hasn't, Malaysia hasn't, South Africa hasn't, Ghana hasn't, Uganda hasn't, Kenya hasn't, Gambia hasn't. We created states. The British colony, those who came to Nigeria to work for the British colony, a good number of those guys were from Oxford and Cambridge, ethnographers, anthropologists. Most of the lines they drew as provinces for Nigeria today was a result of very serious work. Now, we created these states, Then we created local government. And the option of whether states would have been the best is a different thing. But also remember that creation of state was not really a scientific, it was largely to stop Ojukwu from going to war. Then after that, creation of state became something that the big boys just gathered in the Armed Forces Ruling Council and distributed states to themselves. They said it was even worse with local government. That's why you see many local government today, people are still fighting because whoever had the mouth to reach Abuja got a local government in his hometown or whatever. So whether this idea of subnational was the best for us to, because now what you've created is 36 areas of opportunity and privilege. So what you're just doing largely is downloading corruption to the, and then you have a system that is not accountable. Because right now, Ngozi Iweala did us a fantastic job, but it has been thrown away. At least she used to tell us, you can go check on the website and see how much money has gone to your local government. But we are all lepers. Where are we going to find the fingers to hold these governments accountable? Because the average person appoints his stooge as the commissioner who is going to collect the check here in Abuja. And I used to hear, I don't know whether it's a joke or so, but they said some people collect the check, lodge them in banks, and spend a month here in Abuja, collect some of the interest, and then they go back. We have a very convoluted and a skewed system of managing funds that is not productive. So ordinary citizens have no idea about what is happening to themselves. And we have now been suspended to a point in which it's left for the governor to do what what he wants to do. So it's a very complicated thing, but I think that the reason for our corruption, the reason for our mismanagement of resources is also based on the choices that we've made. Look at the National Assembly. Many people will tell you, did we need a National Assembly of this nature? In South Africa, for example, Mandela came out of prison on the 11th of February 1990. By 1994, he was already, but subsequently, when they were elected, between 1990 and 1994, they had opportunity to debate a constitution. So when they went into parliament, it was just to append their signature. Most of the hard work had already been done. In our own case in Nigeria, we say we elect people, then you put them in a room and tell them, decide what allowances you want, decide what salaries you want. So these guys are just fetching money and distributing to themselves. And now we don't know how to put a check on that because you ask, we have this number of members of the House, we've got this number of senators. Everybody is literally doing as they like. So if you are lucky and your senator remembers you and comes and sings a borehole, then you all go into clapping mode because you are lucky. My friend Parutomi used to say that if you hear two people say, our governor built a road of 20 kilometers, the next person will say, oh boy, you are lucky, you're 20 kilometers. Hey, you are lucky. So we've become so injured that they cut off your finger. Make I just manage because the next person said, nah, two, they cut. So it's not, as I said, the corruption is embedded in the nature of the choices that we made.
Bishop, this almost feeds into the argument for a new constitution.
Here is what I think. I have read a little bit about how the Americans worked on their constitution. The problem, and luckily for me, I'm a very lucky Nigerian, very, very lucky, and I cannot thank God enough for this country. I served as a member of the Electoral Reform Committee. I served as a member of the Political Reform Committee. And we looked at these issues, and I now realize that subsequently, actually from 1976, 77, with the debate of the 1979, what is now the Constitution, go back and look at the records. What then happened, my little experience as Secretary of the Political Reform Conference, was that most of 90% of the people who were sent into that hall were all politicians. It's the same thing that happened in 1977, 78. Indeed, when the debate about Sharia law came about, you remember all the Muslims, North and South, all walked out. I went back, I cross-checked during my research, when I was researching for my PhD thesis. I went back, pulled out the records, and I looked at and discovered that when the Muslims walked out, they now set up what they call a committee of wise men to look at, it was chaired by Simeon Adebo, to look at the issues and how to bring the members back. Now, they finally found a solution. But guess what? The solution they found that enabled them to go back and continue the proceedings was such that at the end, I counted the names one by one. The only person who didn't enter politics directly was Simeon Adebo. But the other 23 members of that committee all ended up as members of the MPN. Now, the point I'm making is I realized, even at my experience as a member of the Political Reform Committee, was that most of these guys were just using the opportunity. They're not interested in lawmaking. They're just interested in cobbling political formations. And when we worked with the National Electoral Reform Committee, remember, one of the recommendations we made, we would not have been where we are today. But unfortunately, when we submitted the report, the then Attorney General, the things we recommended, for example, I said, look, don't swear anybody in until all these court cases have been exhausted. Okay, because once somebody claims that seat, you can't bring them down because they cripple every system. They have the resources, they have access to all the institutions of power.
Is this at every level?
If you be, of course, the idea was if you contest election, okay, because it's a question of where do you shift the burden of proof. I say, okay, you stole from me. You say I should prove. Okay, you are holding my phone. I say you stole my phone. You say no, I should prove that the phone is yours. Instead of asking you to prove that the phone is yours. So what we recommended was try and sort these things out before you swear in anybody. But guess what? The legal advisor, the Attorney General of the Federation at that time, remember that PDP had said that they will govern Nigeria for 60 years. And I told them, if you go this way, you're not going to be in power. That was why they just smothered those sections of the recommendation. So I'm saying that there is a total absence of political will, to do the right things. But look, this is why we have civil society. And let me tell you, I'm very, very proud of the quality of young men and women in Nigeria who are banging and banging and banging at the door for change in the electoral process.
Sadly, our time is up, but I must ask you this question. I think over a month ago, you wrote President Bola Tinubu on the insecurity situation across the country. I don't know if you have positive feedback from that.
You think the president will write to me to say?
No, I mean his actions would suggest.
Well, I heard that they had a security meeting. I was already in Rome. I don't know. I also hear they're talking about a security summit, which I think is a dumb idea, I'm sorry to say, because the people who are killing us didn't organize a summit. And I don't understand. The other day I had the minister announcing that this is where we are going to buy weapons. Okay? And meanwhile, the bandits are not telling you where they are buying their weapons. So it's very difficult to know. But here is my view. And I've said it publicly. I think the president ought to muster the political will to say, people, by the 30th of June, I need to see results. And if I don't see results, there will be consequences. So, but the idea that we are trying, and we are trying, and we are trying, yes, but I'm also saddened by the fact that we have this loss of life across the board. But so for me, I think that there's still a lot to be done, but if you're going to have a security meeting, I think the best thing is to figure out how to sort this problem. You don't need a security summit, to decide how we're going to confront this problem. But the truth of the matter is that time is not on our side.
Thank you very much, Bishop. I recall that this position was also canvassed by a member of the House of Representatives who's very outspoken about the security situation, Ahmed Jaha from Borno State, who said that the political will is what's lacking. He linked this with...
And please, sorry, don't forget that this has become a heavy business for people across the board. Whether they are in politics, or whether they are in private business, whether they are in uniform, there are people who are making tons and tons and tons of money off the back of our people who are dying and I call it blood money. Mm-hmm. Because because this matter can be resolved. It can be resolved. We cannot say that there are forests in Nigeria and we don't know who is inhabiting this forest. It's not possible.
Bishop Matthew Kukah, thank you very much for your time on Political Paradigm.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you, Terry.
You're most welcome. Well, that's all the time we have on Political Paradigm. I've been speaking with the Roman Catholic Bishop of Sokoto Diocese, Bishop Matthew Kukah, who was very vocal on national issues. If you'd like to catch this episode and more, please go to channelstv.com or simply go to YouTube and search Political Paradigm. I'm Terry Kumi. Goodbye.